On the heels of the DC announcement slate from James Gunn, today we're diving into the cryptid and occult side of the DC Comics universe and talking all about a team called the Creature Commandos. As J.M. DeMatteis tells it, Creature Commandos is something that he created when he was first getting into the comics business. He says that he, quote, cooked it up as a pitch for weird war tales, maybe 6 months after he started selling stories to the DC anthology books. DeMatteis had been working on the Weird War Tales series and wanted to lean into the weird part of the title, but then the infamous DC implosion struck the market and DeMatteis was out of work for most of a year. When he did come back to DC Comics and began working with his editor, Len Wein, he pitched Creature Commandos again, as Wein was looking for ongoing series for their new direction. Len went for it, as JM says, and brought to life by the artwork of one Pat Broderick. So what is this team? During World War II, generals, admirals, and senators from the USA and across the globe tasked a renowned biochemist with standing up a new covert PSYOPs project known only as Project M, the M meaning monster. It was Professor Mazursky who sought to apply the idea that humans are frightened by monsters and ghouls and things that go bump in the night, and to apply that to bioweapons research, to weaponize these nightmarish archetypes and bring them to bear against Axis forces. Mazursky established a laboratory and base of operations in a secret lab beneath the Statue of Liberty on Liberty Island. At first, he took volunteers for the project. Warren Griffith was a farm boy from Oklahoma cursed with lycanthropy, so he joined the team as their de facto werewolf. Sergeant Vincent Valcoro from the streets of New York City was sentenced to 30 years in an army brig, but given the option of reducing his time if he would volunteer for Project M. So he joined and was injected with a compound that included chemicals and DNA extracted from New Mexican vampire bats, and Valcoro was transformed into a vampire. Private Elliot Lucky Taylor of Duluth, Minnesota, from the U.S. Marine Corps stepped on a landmine in the South Pacific Theater. Surgeons worked on him for weeks on end, and they saved his life, though he was turned into a hulking patchwork monstrosity that looked like Frankenstein's monster. Seattle, Washington native Lieutenant Matthew Shreve from Army Intelligence was handpicked to lead this new unit. At one point, when Shreve was wounded, he went to a plastic surgeon named Dr. Mira Rhodes for an operation, and during that procedure, Rhodes breathed in some gases and she was transformed into a snake-haired monstrosity, a Gorgon who took on the name Medusa. And in a later issue of Weird War Tales, she joined Shreve's Creature Commandos team. Mazursky also created a functioning android named Jake 1, which became part of the G.I. Robot series. This was a being he created with his assistant Chuck Grayson, who happened to have also been an assistant to a guy named Dr. Robert Crane, the first Robot Man. The G.I. Robot series included Joe and Mac, who were prototypes, Jake 1, then Jake 2, and at one time a Jake 6.1 that was part of an organization named Checkmate. Jake is an acronym meaning Jungle, Automatic Killer, Experimental. The Creature Commandos roster has also changed and evolved over the years. For example, in 2019's animated short for DC Showcase, Sergeant Rock, voiced by Carl Urban, led the Creature Commandos against a horde of Nazi zombies. Project M leader Mazursky's daughter, Nina Mazursky, also joined them at one point. Then there was Ben Hunter. He was once a homicide detective, then during World War II led Hunter's Hellcats. That led to him getting body transplants to keep him young and fighting with the Commandos. Gunner was a U.S. Marine from the Losers who became a cyborg soldier, and both of these people joined the team at one point or another. Others who have been part of the team over the years and who have leaned into the classical Universal Monsters trope included Aten, the Living Mummy, a member of the team whose name derived from Egypt of antiquity, and names like King Tut's dad, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Kalas is another mummy with the team who served as a combat medic. Bogman became the team's creature from the Black Lagoon pastiche. Dr. Phosphorus was once Dr. Alex Sartorius, and he was once awash in radioactive phosphorus during an experiment gone awry. Lady Frankenstein joined the team to be with Frankenstein's monster during the time he was an agent of Shade. Much later, Jared, aka G.I. Zombie, also joined the Creature Commandos as their zombie component. And then we get James Gunn's version, which will include Weasel, who we saw in the Suicide Squad. According to the history of the DC Universe, the Creature Commandos were deployed to World War II's most bizarre campaigns, and their record of victory was stunning, as were those of G.I. Robot and Valor, the Viking Commando. Per the definitive directory of the DC Universe, they were sent on missions no sane soldier would touch, and they became legends only whispered about on the battlefields. World War II's weirdest warriors were introduced in media res in 1980's Weird War Tales with issue 93, narrated by a skeletal depiction of death. The team was in a centuries-old castle in Nazi-occupied France, fighting with the worst of Hitler's killer elite. This was their first mission together as a new team, sent there to stop the Germans from conducting experiments. The team used their supernatural powers to get past the guards and make entry, and then, as the narration describes, they cut through the amazed Germans like sabers slicing through men of wax. And once inside, they shot and killed Franklin D. Roosevelt. Sort of. They also had Stalin, Churchill, Eisenhower as secret duplicates, which they intended to have replace world leaders. The Creature Commandos then shot and punched and clawed their way out of that den of evil and back to safety. Their next mission was in issue 97 to save a Dr. Frederic, France's top scientist, from a German armored car. On the hike out, in the cold of a blistering snowstorm under crisp moonlight, they encountered a pack of hungry wolves, and so the LT savagely ripped them apart. As they made it to their extraction point, the doctor was revealed to be a fake, and it was a setup to get the Creature Commandos into a kill box. Fake Frederic was shot by the faceless horde, and so the team again savagely sliced their way through wave after wave of Axis soldiers. The Creature Commandos then headed to an island in the South Pacific to battle dinosaurs in a war that time forgot. They fought a dinosaur and then waves and waves of Japanese soldiers. The Japanese Navy was then going to shell the island with their battleship fleet parked right offshore, so the Creature Commandos flew off on pterodactyls while an army of dinosaurs waded out to sea to assault the Japanese naval fleet, even sinking an aircraft carrier. Shreve took photos of the dinosaurs for Army intelligence, but Lucky grabbed the camera and threw it in the water. He didn't want what happened to them to happen to the animals on the island. Their next mission was around a group of school children that had been brainwashed and turned into little fascist zombies, injected with a super serum, and which was meant to kick off the launch of a new generation only loyal to Adolf himself. Shreve disguised himself as Colonel Kruger, the guy who masterminded the evil plot, and they smuggled themselves into Germany to, as he put it, make sure those children never grew up. The Creature Commandos were gassed and held prisoner. The children's final test was to kill the Creature Commandos, but they smacked the kids enough to snap them out of their brainwashing and bring back their memories, and so the children ended up attacking their captors instead. At the end, the super serum bloated their bodies and the kids melted just outside the razor wire of the prison. Their next mission sent them to a little town in New York called Freedom to take on Nazi sympathizers. They terrorized the town for a week in their monster forms while Shreve firebombed the local propaganda printer, which burned the entire town to the ground. By issue 108, Lucky had taken a razor to his own throat in an attempted suicide, but he was taken to a hospital nearby in London just in time. This happened just after they'd been captured and tortured in a concentration camp. Getting into the camp had been their plan so they could find the real Dr. Frederic, who was now developing new nerve gas formulas. Back home, doctors managed to heal Lucky by sewing him back together and giving him vocal cords, which, as we saw at the beginning, he cut out himself. The team reminded him that it takes more courage to live than to die. Later, when a German Panzer tank division was blitzing through the countryside, the Creature Commandos were the Allies' response. Heavy fog grounded their fighter planes and artillery was silent without FOs being able to call in coordinates due to lack of line of sight. The Creature Commandos were taken to the drop zone by a flying fortress and almost perished when a bomb got lodged in the bomb bay. Lucky jumped on the bomb to free it, riding it to the ground, hoping to die and hoping they let him stay dead this time. A Luftwaffe night fighter attacked, but he slammed into the ground after Vampire Valkoro bit him. On the ground, they got to a dam which they planned to blow up in order to flood and drown the Panzer tanks. They ended up fighting with tanks and half-tracks until a dam exploded and flooded the valley. When they washed ashore, they hiked out of the woods carrying the lieutenant before ambushing and stealing a German half-track while artillery shells rained down upon them. Back at base, the team brought their mangled LT to medical, which is when they met Dr. Myrna Rhodes, chief plastic surgeon who had fixed Lieutenant Shreve. This is when she was exposed to the gas, transformed, and joined the Creature Commandos. Their next mission sent them to Tatu, an island in the South Pacific, to save some Marines and 3 vessels reporting an unidentified bogey. On the way, they were attacked by a pteranodon, crashed in the ocean, and there they encountered GI Robot for the first time. They were all captured by the USO or UAP and taken to an undersea city called Atlantis. Well, this was Atlantis 2, the backup city. It was Jake, the GI Robot, who destroyed Atlantis 2 with the city's own missiles, with Jake destroying himself in order to save his new team. They were then sent to North Africa to hold off Rommel until General Patton could mount a counterattack. Valkoro scared a German pilot who crashed his plane near the feet of the Sphinx in Egypt. The team were shrunk down after they drank some wine inside a tomb in a Giza pyramid. Weird decision. But the tiny creatures and one life-size Medusa attacked a Panzer camp, saving Patton. And it happened to be Medusa's snake poison, which was the antidote for the shrinking potion. In issue 114, the Creature Commandos headed to the Alpine meadows of France to link up with a Professor Leclerc and his daughter Colette to extract them, but Colette's father was rounded up and sent to a camp. A German patrol stopped them, and it was Medusa's head of snakes that stopped them. The team then had to go to Germany to rescue the professor before the enemies figured out his identity. So the Creature Commandos parachuted behind enemy lines and linked up with the underground, who then helped the Creature Commandos disguise themselves as the Circus of Madness. which they then took on tour to all the different camps in Germany in that occupied area until they found the professor and made it back to Allied territory. Later, Jake too was injured and sent to a hospital, so the Creature Commandos went to visit this second GI robot for support. They had to call the team up along with GI Robot's partner Sergeant Coker to save a princess in a castle, with GI Robot destroying a German U-boat to do that. They were again back in the desert of North Africa, fighting back against Rommel's forces under the blazing heat of the desert sun. Shreve, ornery as ever, continued to insult his team and make fun of their looks as they headed for a destroyer bound for Sicily. On shore in northern Italy, they ended up battling a blazing goddess named Inferno. After that, the team got some downtime, so they took a tour of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. Some horrible parent accidentally dropped their kid over the edge of the Eiffel Tower, and so Valcoro transformed into his vampire bat form and then swooped down and saved her. It was a good deed, but local police took notice, saw the team as monsters, and they attacked. Then later the team went to the Louvre for another tour, then made the trek to the site of the Miracles of Lourdes. Some Axis forces were using the pilgrimage line as a human shield, but the Creature Commandos were there, and so they put a stop to that. GI Robot and the Creature Commandos then received some medals from the Royal Palace in London for their bravery. Next, they went to a Chelsea museum to see wax figures of Adolf, Genghis Khan, Dracula, Jack the Ripper, and other bloodthirsty historical tyrants. But some there at the museum thought the team were part of the display. Shreve called the team the next day and at an airfield laughed in their faces at what happened at Chelsea Museum. Later that night, a B-17 dropped them into Italy to find out why a secret agent named Alesso had stopped sending information, having to fight through Axis execution squads along the way. They ended up in a time machine that sent them to a place called New Earth far in the future. That ended up being a future dystopia, eventually escaped and headed back to their own timeline. They then encountered Professor Diablo and his galaxy of ghouls before ending up on a submarine and then ashore in a fight against some mechanical Axis soldiers made specifically to counter the Creature Commandos. That led to them attacking a windmill disguised as a rocket battery and some more robots. Toward the end of World War II, the Creature Commandos were court-martialed for an unnamed crime. Instead of execution, they were allowed to man an ICBM aimed directly at Hitler's chancellery in Berlin. On that flight, the craft malfunctioned, and both the craft and the team were lost somewhere in deep space. In 1988, the young All-Stars went to Liberty Island to visit Project M via a trap door hidden by a bench that had a perpetual wet paint sign on it. They were there to meet with Mazursky for help with Helena. Mazursky showed them a GI robot, an android, a gorilla, a T-Rex, and a comatose Miss America from Uncle Sam's Freedom Fighters team, all in stasis. The team wouldn't be seen again for nearly 2 decades. In the year 2000, Timothy Truman kicked off an 8-issue miniseries called Creature Commandos. The way this came to be was interesting. DC was looking for new titles and to reboot some of their older, more obscure properties. So John Ostrander, whom Truman had worked with on Grim Jack at First Comics, said, "Hey, how about you do Creature Commandos? I dare you. You'd actually be great on that book." So Truman put together a pitch and DC was on board. Captain Lucius Hunter led this new iteration of the team, which now comprised of Warren Griffith, here called Wolfpack, Mira Rhodes, aka Medusa, Elliot Taylor, aka Patchwork Man, Vincent Valcoro as the vampire, and the Gunner, the unknown soldier who died on a beach in the South Pacific during World War II and who was converted into a walking gun that was 1/4 flesh and 75% living metal. The team was tasked with fighting back against Lord Saturna and a cabal of interdimensional warlords who sought to turn the cosmos into one single confederation. In 2002, while Superman and Lois were at Dracula's castle on assignment, we get a cameo of the Creature Commandos, and then they got the cover of Action Comics 872, which promised the return of the Creature Commandos. They did indeed return when Lex Luthor activated Brainiac's ship, and right in front of Superman, the caskets were opened, and they teamed up with Superman and Supergirl to fight an army of evil drones. There's another cameo of them in Superman 692 as General Sam Lane and Guardian walked through 7734, the Project M archive rooms on robotics and genetics. In 2011, when the DC Universe was rebooted into the new 52 continuity with the Flashpoint event, the Creature Commandos became the Special Operations Unit for Father Time's Shade organization, the Superhuman Advanced Defense Executive. In one Flashpoint story, we go back to a frozen hell of the North Atlantic in 1942, where Shreve's men ran into the Patchwork Man when they were ambushed by a German unit. Now Frankenstein and Shreve were working with Mazursky at Project M to create this new team. Nina Mazursky, RAF Captain Valcoro, a traitor who volunteered to commute a death sentence, along with Warren Griffith from the army who was wounded and hoped Project M would heal him, joined the team. So Frank and the team battled the Axis powers, and in 1945, they ran into a guy named Jigsaw Man. Frank killed him, smashed into a bunker, and then killed Hitler himself. In Young Monsters in Love, we see the team in action in World War II, fighting against Steel Stormtroopers. And in between missions, the team were kept in stasis at Project M in Metropolis now, not New York. Frank was going to be shut down too, and Robert Crane used G.I. Robot to enforce the order. But Frank managed to break out in 2011 and free his team. General Lane then called in Miranda Shreve, the monster hunter, to track them all down. She found them at Slaughter Swamp and attacked them, almost killing Frank, but Bride of Frankenstein showed up to tell Shreve that her family was killed by Shreve's other Creature Commandos team that had comprised of Dr. Phosphorus, Solomon Grundy, Medusa, and Man-Bat. Later, Bride of Frankenstein also joined SHADE and kept working with Frankenstein, agent of SHADE. Creature Commandos showed up in Justice League United after Stargirl dropped her staff and G.I. Zombie picked it up. This was Frank, Valcora, Medusa, Bogman, and G.I. Robot, and they all had to team up to figure out what was going on in their little time distortion bubble. In Justice League Dark, Frank and the Creature Commandos appeared again, this time investigating a slaughter on a ship by one of the other kind creatures. Frank had to sacrifice himself here to save Wonder Woman from the monsters. With James Gunn's new DC project announcements, which include Creature Commandos as a 7-episode animated series, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for this new team. Gunn's team is Rick Flag Sr., Nina Mazursky, Dr. Phosphorus, Frankenstein, G.I. Robot, and Weasel, along with the Bride of Frankenstein in a lead role. We'll have to see where this goes next, which means that's a wrap on this one, my friends. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.